Hello students, this is the video for 5.10's lesson. So this lesson actually does have a Nearpod with it, but in class I didn't have any of the students pull it up. I just pulled it up and we just kind of looked at it on the board. So if you want to log into it, you'll be able to see the code for this on there and that's fine. But I don't want you to think you have to. Sorry, I thought this was already logged in. Obviously it was not. Okay, so let's go with this one. Okay. So don't worry about that one. Okay. So you're going to see some stuff from earlier today. Sorry about that. All right. So this is the Nearpod. So it's asking you to graph both of the left side inequalities in your notes on the same graph. The reason we're doing this is that the quiz that you guys are going to take tomorrow, or whenever you come back to school if you're watching this from home, is going to be on graphing. So we're going to do a lot of graphing practice today so that you're ready for your quiz tomorrow. So the first thing it wants us to do is graph this negative 5x plus 3y is less than or equal to 45 and 2x plus 3y is greater than 24. And remember, when we do systems of inequalities, we graph them on the same graph. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to grab this and take the screenshot over to a place I can actually write on it. So in our notes here, this is the first thing that it wants us to do. So I'm going to take this, and we need to graph this guy on this graph right here. Now there are steps here for how to do that, but this is something you do already know, okay? So, and then I'm also going to create some space that I can write a little bit. You do only need 3 graphs for what we're doing today. So I'm going to kill this middle one so I have a little bit more room to work. You're welcome to just do this on the back or on a different piece of paper or whatever works for you. So on this one, when we have these 2 different inequalities, okay, we have this graph that has no numbers, no labels, and really all we know is that we're supposed to be graphing inequalities. So we need to figure out some more information before we're really able to dig in and do what needs to be done. So the first thing that you're pretty much always going to want to do is label your graph. Well, you can't label your graph unless you know what to label it with. And in most cases, we're going to need our x and y intercepts to know how to set up our graph, because we need to know which numbers we need to be able to see on our graph. So, like, if you had an x-intercept that was 100, and every single one of these was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., 100 would be off the page. You wouldn't be able to see it, so you would not know where the x-intercept was. So that's what we're trying to avoid, is a graph that doesn't really help us see anything. So the first thing you're always going to want to do is get your x and y intercepts. So our first inequality was negative 5x plus 3y is less than or equal to 45. Now, if you remember from before Christmas break, when we have x-intercepts, it's where y is going to be 0. Because if it's crossing this line right here, the y value has to be 0. Right here, it would be 1, 0. Here, it would be 3, 0. 6, 0, etc. No matter where you are on this graph, if you're on this line, you're going to be at y equals 0. So because of that, instead of y, we can plug in a 0. So we can say negative 5x plus 3 times 0 is less than or equal to 45, and that's going to give us where the x is going to cross. Now, when we plug a 0 in here, this whole thing just turns into a 0. So I tell everybody in class, you can actually just like cover the y up and solve that equation as if that part never existed, because it's going to 0 out. So negative 5x is less than or equal to 45. Now to solve, we would divide by negative 5. So x would be greater than or equal to negative 9. Remember, when we divide by a negative, we flip our sign around. So x is greater than or equal to negative 9. But that's not really what an x-intercept looks like. Remember, x-intercepts should be points. Okay? So our x-intercept should be the point negative 9, 0. Okay? Now, we also need our y-intercept for this same one. And in a y-intercept, anywhere on this line that we are, x value is always 0 there. Okay? It doesn't matter how high up you go, your x value is still going to be 0. So what we do here is we do the exact opposite. So we plug a 0 in instead of x. So we say negative 5 times 0 plus 3y is less than or equal to 45. So again, that's going to zero this out. It's going to go away. So we're going to have 3y is less than or equal to 45. We divide by 3, and y is less than or equal to 15. So our y-intercept is at 0, 15. Okay, so that's great. We also need to be taking care of our other inequality, though. When we're doing a system, we have to be able to graph both. So the other one is 2x plus 3y greater than 24. So I'm actually going to get rid of this so I have more room to work. Okay, and we do the same thing. We would do 2x plus 3 times 0 for the y if we're trying to find the x-intercept. Or if we're trying to find the y-intercept, we would do 2 times 0 plus 3 times y is greater than 24. And then you just solve. So 2x is greater than 24, or x is greater than 12. Again, that's not a point, so we need to rewrite it as 12, 0. This one, that zeroes out, so we're left with 3y is greater than 24. Divide it by 3, and y ends up being greater than 8. Again, that's not a point, so we use 0, 8. Okay? Hopefully that was all review for you. Okay? Now, I know that may not have been. So on the next one, I'm going to ask you to do this a little bit more on your own. Okay? So I did this whole first one for you, but I need you to know how to do it for the second one too. So we have all these y-intercepts and x-intercepts. And we know that on our x-axis, we need to be able to hit negative 9 and positive 12. And on our y-axis, we need to be able to hit 15 and 8. Now, this graph that I put on here for you is really not conducive to that. It's really hard to get to negative 9 when you only have 2 slots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my axis, and I'm going to say, just kidding, my y-axis is over here. And the reason I'm doing that is so that we can make a graph that's a little bit easier to read. Okay. Now, I'm still going to want to count by more than ones because I still don't have 9 spots or 12 spots. But just keep that in mind. So I think for y, let's count by 3s, I think will be good. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. Or if we go the other way, negative 3, negative 6, negative 9, negative 12, negative 15, negative 18, etc. Okay. Now for y's, we don't need negatives, but we do need to be able to get up to 15. Now we don't have enough lines to get up to 15 by counting by ones. So let's go ahead and count by 2s. 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22. Okay. Now we have to plot our points. Okay, so negative 9, 0 would be here. Our other point for that inequality was at 0, 15, which would be here. Okay, now if you look down here, we're supposed to graph each line and then decide if the line should be solid or dotted. So we can connect it, that's fine, but we do need to decide if this should be a solid straight line or if it should be a dotted line. So hopefully you remember, dotted lines come into play when the line should not be included. Okay. So with this one, this is a less than or equal to symbol. It can equal the line, which means we can leave it solid. Okay. Then we have to decide where to shade. So the easiest way to decide where to shade is to pick a point and test it. So 0, 0 is always going to be your easiest point to test. The reason for that is if you put a 0 in here and a 0 in here, then this becomes 0 and this becomes 0, which is really easy to work with. 0 plus 0 is just 0. The whole thing zeroes out when you use 0 plus 0. Now we're checking, is 0 less than or equal to 45? Well, yeah, 45 is a lot bigger than 0. So that tells us that we do want to be shading in down here. Okay, so if this is the area that we want to be shading in, then we would take this and we would shade this side of the line. Okay. And then we have to do it for the other. So I just gave you a really good example of how you graph that, how you do that. So I want you to go ahead and try that out with this one now. So there's your intercepts. Go ahead and try and graph it. Decide if it should be solid or dotted. Decide where you should shade. Go ahead and pause the video until you've tried. And then when you're ready, I'll put the answer back up here for you. Okay, so hopefully you were able to get that. That's where we would be shading on this one because 0 is not greater than 24. And there is one thing that I did not do on this one kind of on purpose. I wanted to circle back to it. Should it be solid or dotted on the line? So we're looking, oh my goodness, we're looking right here. What we're really looking for is this or equal to symbol. Here we had the or equal to symbol, so we made it solid. Here we do not have the or equal to symbol, so we actually need to make this one dashed. And I will come back in and fill in the correct shadings now. But those should be a dotted line on this one. Okay. Okay, so we've done that. That's great. Now we have to be able to look at this graph and see what the heck this actually even means. Okay, where are our answers? What are our solutions that work versus don't work? So 0, 0 worked when we were talking about this purple one. We're like, yeah, that totally works, shade it in. But then we got down here and 0, 0 did not work. So we didn't shade it in there. So does 0, 0 work for the system of the inequalities? The answer is no, it doesn't. It only fulfills one requirement. So it would not be a solution. The solution to this system, the solution set, I guess I should call it, should really just be this area. Okay? This pinkish area where they both were is the solution. Now, I'm always going to show you both sides of that graph to make sure that you're understanding where that's coming from. But the solution set is only where they are both shaded in, okay? So from here on up all the way over here, all the way over here, and then it's going to go down this way, all the way over here. Those are solutions. Anything out here on this outside of this pink area is not a solution. And we can check that. I mean, we can check whatever point you want. You could check the point 1, 1 right here and see if it works. It won't. You could check this point. It will work here and here. And what I mean by check it is I mean take your x and y and plug them in. So the point like 9, 6, for example, you could plug 9 in for x and 6 in for y in both of these equations, and you would get a true statement. When you plugged it in here, it would be less than or equal to 45. When you plugged it in here, it would be greater than 24. Okay? Those would work. Anything over here wouldn't work. So you could plug in like negative 6, 10 right here. It would not work in either of these. You would get false statements out of both of those. Okay? So hopefully that was a good review for you about what we do with our graphing of our inequalities. So we're going to go back over to our Nearpod because we also need to do this right side one. So on this right side one, it's really, really similar. It has just different numbers. Okay, just different numbers. So what I want you to do on this one is I want you to come in and I want you to try to graph this one all by your little selves. Okay, because that's what you're going to have to do on your quiz. Okay, the Unit 5 Quiz 2 is all about graphing inequalities, so you need to be able to do it. Now I realize there maybe not be a ton of room for you here to go ahead and do that, so feel free to use a different piece of paper or the back of this paper and try and do that. Try to graph this one. Now I will put the answer up on Canvas for you. I will put it up on the notes that I submit online, but I'm not going to do it in this video. If you have questions about how to do it, you can go back and look at what we did here, but I really want you to try this one by yourself, okay? So if you are still unsure, definitely send me an email or come talk to me and we can go over it a little bit more slowly, but I really want you to be able to do that on your own, okay? So the next thing we're going to do on this one right here is we're going to talk about story problem, which is also on your quiz. So go ahead and pause this video, do that graphing, and then come back and push play and we will talk about the story problem now. Okay, there is one more thing I forgot about that we do need to talk about a little bit. So on this one, I asked you to write the set of inequalities for the graph below, and I'm okay with you guys not necessarily actually writing it out, but I do want you to realize that the greater than or less than symbols do matter, okay? This is legitimately how we create these shapes on a grid, like a triangle. How we would do it is we would do it with shading, with inequalities. So we would write the one line and decide if it should be less than or greater than for the shading. Now I'm going to show you what happens when we get it wrong, okay? So with this one on the left side, if we had said greater than or less than, I'm really not sure, to be honest. I'd have to check some points. What happens is that we shade to the leftish of this line, and it ends up on the outside instead of the inside where we wanted it. Same thing with this bottom line, it ends up underneath instead of on top, so that one we accidentally put less than or equal to rather than greater than or equal to. And on the right side, the same thing happened. It ended up on the right instead of on the inside like we wanted it to. So you do need to be really careful of that. And on your homework, there are problems that ask you to write out the inequalities. So you do need to know how to do that. So keep in mind, you're going to be looking at x and y intercepts and or slope to try and figure out what those inequalities are. And you do need to be able to write those. So if you have any questions on that, definitely come talk to me. I don't think anything on the homework or on the test is something you guys aren't going to know how to do. I think it's all pretty straightforward stuff. But if you do get stuck, let me know. Okay? So now let's go ahead and move on to what's going to be on your quiz, because that is the story problem. And this is this is the meat of this lesson about everything you need to know for your quiz. Your quiz is easier than what we're going to do on this lesson. And the reason for that is this one is a system of inequalities that we need to graph and do things with. So you have to do everything twice. The quiz is just one inequality, so you only have to do everything once, which is a little bit easier. So the story problem says there are 2 brands of granola bars. Totally Yummy contains 4 grams of protein and 6 grams of fat per scoop. Fantastic Food contains 12 grams of protein and 4 grams of fat per bar. That should also say bar. Sorry, they should both be granola bars. Your coach has recommended that you eat at least 8 grams of protein and no more than 6 grams of fat per snack. What combination of bars could satisfy the recommendation of the coach? So what you're going to want to do here, and I'm actually just going to go over to here. What you're going to want to do is to come up with what 2 constraints you have that are going to be limiting this snack. Now, if we go through and read it again, remember I always like it when you guys read twice, right? Read it once just to see what's going on. Read it again looking for key information. So Totally Yummy contains 4 grams of protein and 6 grams of fat per bar. Fantastic Food contains 12 grams of protein and 4 grams of fat per bar. Your coach has recommended that you eat at least 8 grams of protein and no more than 6 grams of fat per snack. Okay, so the 2 constraints that we're working with here are going to be, I'm going to do different colors for this one. We're going to be doing fat, and we're also needing to talk about protein. So I want you to list out what's everything you know about fat and protein from the problem. So I'll go back to it so you guys can see it. And I need you to list out everything you know about fats, everything you know about protein from this information. Okay. So I'll give you guys a second just so you can still see that on the page. Okay. So we know that for the fats, Totally Yummy, I'm going to call it TY, has 6 grams of fat per granola bar. And we know that Fantastic Foods, I'm going to call it FF, has 4 grams of fat per bar. Okay. We also know that your coach is saying that he wants you to have no more than 6 grams of fat total per snack, right? Anytime you eat a snack, he doesn't want you to have more than 6 grams of fat. For protein, we know that Totally Yummy has 4 grams per bar. And we know that Fantastic Foods has 12 grams per bar. And we also know that your coach wants you to have at least 8 grams total when you have a snack. Okay? All right. So that's everything we know. Now, step 1, according to your notes, is to write the inequalities. That's the first thing we need to do when we have story problems here. So we need to write these out. Now, the variables that you're going to have essentially come down to how many bars are you going to eat? How many Totally Yummy bars are you going to eat? How many Fantastic Food bars are you going to eat? The number of bars that you eat is what's changing. But you don't have to eat the same amount necessarily. So these we are going to call our variables. We're going to say X is for Totally Yummy and Y is for Fantastic Foods. Now you could use different variables, but I think you guys are most used to seeing the X and Y, so that's what I'm going to use. I actually, when I did this on my paper, I used T and F because that's just what made sense to me. But I think for you guys, it'll make the most sense to use X and Y because we're going to be talking about X-axis and Y-axis, and I think this will just be less confusing for you. Now, does it matter which one's which? No, but I will tell you that on your quiz, it tells you which one is which, so you need to stick with what it tells you on your quiz, okay? So, for the fats, Totally Yummy is going to be X, and we know that there are 6 grams per bar. So if we eat 7 bars, all we would have to do to figure out how many grams of fat we were eating is do 6 times 7. So that logic can be applied if we change the number of bars that we eat. It's going to be 6 times however many we eat. Now, the rest of the fat that you're going to get in there is going to come from how many Fantastic Foods bars you eat. And Fantastic Foods bars have 4 grams. So we can times 4 by however many we eat to get our total of how much fat came from those. And we know that our coach doesn't want us to have any more than 6 grams. Okay, so I'm going to put the 6 here. And we need to think through, what does no more than mean? No more than means that this total has to be less than or equal to 6. It can be 6, but it can't be any more than that, so it's got to be smaller. So that's our first inequality. Now I want you to write the inequality for protein. I wrote it out here for this one. The 6 came here. Totally Yummy was our X, and it shows up here. And then the 4 came from here. Fantastic Foods bar is the Y. So this comes down there, this comes down there. And 6 was our total. If you do not understand that, let me know that you need help with this, okay? But I want you to go ahead and write out what the inequality would be for protein then. Go ahead. Okay, so hopefully you were able to get this. If you have any problems with this, please let me know ASAP. But it should be 4x plus 12y is going to be greater than or equal to 8. Now this time it's greater than or equal to 8 because it's at least. So 8 is the lowest that we want. So we want 8 or bigger than 8. Okay. So now we have our two inequalities. That's step 1. So the second step is going to be graphing each line. Well, in order to graph on this graph that we have on the right side here, oh no, sorry, it'll be down here. In order to graph here, we need to know what numbers we even need to put on this graph. So what we need to do is we need to find our x and our y intercepts for both of these inequalities. Okay. Now remember, to find an x-intercept, you would put 0 in for y. So this whole thing becomes a 0. So we would have 6x is less than or equal to 6. Divide by our 6. X would have to be less than or equal to 1. And our y-intercept becomes 1, 0. Sorry, our x-intercept becomes 1, 0. For y, we would do the same thing. We would plug 0 in for x, which would make this whole thing 0. And we would have 4y is less than or equal to 6. We would divide away again. And we get y is less than or equal to 3/2 or 1.5. I'm going to use 1.5 in this case. You can use whichever. It doesn't really matter, but you'll see why I used 1.5 in a little bit. So there's those two. Now I want you to find the x and y intercepts for this one. Now remember, this will be x, this will be y, this will be x, this will be y. So I want you to figure that out. I'm going to go ahead and let you pause the video, and then I'll give you the answer, but I want you to do the work. Okay, hopefully you got it. This should be at 2, 0, and then at 0 and 0.6 repeating. Okay. Or you could, it would be 2/3 if you used the fraction. Okay. All right. So now our x's, we need to be able to get to 1 and 2. Our y's, we need to be able to get to 0.6 repeating and 1.5. Now, if we used 1, if every 1 was a bar here, then our graph would just be like this little tiny corner, and we really wouldn't be able to see anything. Okay. So I'm going to recommend that we actually count by decimals in this case, and I'm going to say let's count by 0.2s. So 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, 1, 1.2, 1.4, 1.6, 1.8, 2, and the y, we're going to do the same thing. So 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, 1, 1.2, 1.4, 1.6, 1.8, 2. Okay, so for our fat, our x-intercept is 1, 0, so we're going to put a point here, and our y-intercept was 0, 1.5, which would be right there. Okay, and then we would connect the dots. Now we have to decide, should this be a dashed line or a solid line? You guys tell me, what do you think? Okay, hopefully you got that this should be solid. The reason it should be solid is because we were working with an or equal to sign right here. It's less than or equal to 6. So it's the or equal to part that matters. Okay, and then we also need to test a point to decide where to shade. Okay, so take a minute, decide. Where should we shade? How do you know where we should shade? Okay, hopefully you remembered. We're supposed to test a point. We're going to test 0, 0. We're going to plug it in. If we plug a 0 in here, that makes this whole thing 0. If we plug a 0 in here, that makes this whole thing 0. So if you've got 0 here and 0 here, then this whole thing is also 0. Now, is 0 less than or equal to 6? Yes. So we do want to shade down here at 0, 0. So I'm going to go ahead and come in here. Another thing you need to think about, can you have negative granola bars? Because that's what these are right? This is, let's see, our X was for our Totally Yummy bars. So we're going to say number of Totally Yummy bars. And our Y is our number of Fantastic Foods bars. Okay. So can you have a negative amount of granola bars? No, of course not. That would be silly. Okay. So we really just need to shade just right here in this first quadrant under here. Okay. There you go. That's the first one. Now I want you to do the second one. I've shown you how to do the first one. I want you to do the second one. I will put the answer up, of course, so you can double check your work. But I need you guys to take accountability for your learning here and get yourself ready for your quiz tomorrow. Again, if you have any questions at all or the notes I put up on Canvas don't make sense to you, please let me know ASAP. Thanks.